When we talk about psychological harm or damage, we're talking about different kinds of damage. There's actually emotional harm, where the person's peace is disturbed in some way. And we normally think about depression, we think about anxiety, we think about symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, but that's a key harm that the psychologist has to address. There can be also cognitive impairment. And cognitive impairment is a little bit different than emotional harm, and sometimes they come together. There are both symptoms of emotional harm as well as cognitive impairment. And here, neuropsychologists have a significant role to play as perhaps consultants on your project or on your evaluation, or you yourself providing some information from neuropsychological tools. So there's emotional harm that can happen, there's cognitive impairment that can happen, and then there's loss of behavioral control. Now, you can see why the courts want psychologists because of these three different kinds of harm that can take place, psychological harm. You can see why the courts and the triers of fact, whether they're judges or juries or administrative law judges, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, you can see why they desire and want the expertise of psychologists. And when I'm talking about psychologists, generally I'm talking about people that are licensed in a particular jurisdiction so that they can give psychological tests, so that they can legitimately interpret psychological tests and present that to the triers of fact. So we are talking about licensed psychologists, and according to our ethical standards, psychologists can develop areas of expertise through education, through training, and through supervised experience. And so if a psychologist who is licensed does not have a prior experience in doing personal injury evaluations, they can become so. They can become competent through, again, training or supervised experience or through education. But you can see why the courts want licensed psychologists. They want people that basically legitimately can use psychological instruments and interpret those psychological instruments and bring the conclusions of that interpretation to the court so the court can reasonably assess whether there is emotional harm, cognitive impairment, or a loss of behavioral control.